Hello everyone and welcome to the last panel. So unfortunately for everyone who loves these panels, which I hope are most of you, and luckily for all those who are slightly exhausted, this one is going to be the last. And if you're an attentive reader of this wonderful program, you might ask yourself, why on earth would I be hosting this? Because it's about whistleblowing competencies, and I'm an academic, and even worse, I'm a German academic. So that comes with a couple of, let's say, disabilities or biases. And one of them is, well, human relations are governed by law, and once we've improved the law, the human relations will improve. So this is this kind of magical legalism that you find with lawyers very often. And the second problem is that if you think a field of law is very interesting, then you think everybody thinks it's amazingly interesting and knows about it. The problem, of course, being, since I like to get out of the ivory tower every once in a while, I've been advising judges, companies, governments, legislators, and so on and so forth. And the one thing I always found striking was it's not so much the legal uncertainties and loopholes in the law. Are there loopholes in the directive? Yes, of course, in the transposition laws as well. It's not so much the bad actors who are actively trying to circumvent the law, but most of the time, the main problem is that there's a lack of whistleblowing competence, that there's a lack of people who know the law, and that there's a lack of people who know to protect whistleblowers, especially in fields where the law wouldn't help you. And this is why I'm so very, very happy that we have this amazing channel tonight, today, it's still afternoon, which is really jam-packed with people who are much more qualified than me to answer the question of how can we enhance whistleblowing competencies and what are the critical issues. To my right is a true whistleblowing legend. For those who don't know him, Tom Devine is maybe, I'd say, one of the most influential people globally on whistleblowing, maybe the most influential. I still remember when I did my PhD in the US, and I cited very few names in my thesis, but yours showed up quite a while, quite some. So that shows you Tom is amazing, and he's amazing, has been amazing for whistleblowing law in the US, but as well in the European Union. Yet another of my personal heroes right here. If you look at European whistleblowing law, there are, because it's a young field, very few people who have truly been influential. You got Mr. Lewis, of course, and you got Wim Vandekerckhove, who is really a great expert, not just on the legal side of it, but more on the business and ethics side of it, and how to properly apply the rules, and not just, know the rules and read the books. So this is going to be truly amazing. I'm really happy. And on my left side, we got two true trailblazers. One, and I promised you I get this right, is Monika. That post was easy. Kalinauskienė. Yeah. Roughly speaking, she is with the Office of the Prosecutor General in Lithuania and a board member of NEIWA, so she's one of those people who are setting up the administrative whistleblowing agencies and do amazing work, because for many countries this is the first time they have dedicated whistleblowing authorities. And further to my left even is Angelos Kaskanis. We already talked yesterday. He's from Transparency International Greece, and he truly has some amazing insights, both in terms of how whistleblowing policy implementation works within companies as well as in the state, and in particular in Greece, which made for some very interesting depressing stories last night. But I'm sure you're going to tell us more about it. But now you've heard me talk way more than I actually intended to, and I want to start with my panelist. And first, if I may ask Tom Devine to introduce yourself and make your opening statement.
Oh, thank you. I've been working on this for 46 years, and what a exciting development to see all the folks who have joined this movement and really started a legal revolution for freedom of speech. And for sure, the Whistleblower Directive is the most significant development for our movement since 1978, when the first national law was passed. But the jury is out whether it will be a net positive or a net negative from my perspective. One of the main lessons I've learned for doing this so long is that passing a law is only particularly a remedial law that establishes rights, is only the first step in a marathon multi-generational, almost timeless journey. In my family, I'm happy that my daughter has taken up the next generation. She's the whistleblower ombudsman for the U.S. House of Representatives now. But for the bigger picture, in the United States Whistleblower Protection Act, frequently, many times, it's been the foundation for inspirational campaigns that defeated abuses by the most powerful sectors of our society, institutions in our society. Other times, it's been a Trojan horse. And at GAP, we would have to warn people, naive whistleblowers, against sharing their evidence with the official channels because they were almost guaranteeing that they were engaging in an act of professional suicide in facilitating a cover-up. These laws can go either direction. And that's why GAP decided to do some research helping Whistleblowing International Network assess the quality of the laws that implemented the directive. And we know that rights on paper are just the start. There's sometimes like a Grand Canyon between rights on paper and rights in reality. But rights on paper are the foundation. And I'd like to start out by giving credit where it's due in the whistleblowing directive. Some very significant advances for our movement. The first is comprehensive subject matter for all of the EU's competencies that covers both employees in the public and private sectors, but also, unlike US law, isn't limited to a labor management right. Vendors, contractors, shareholders, even company owners whose employees blow the whistle are protected against retaliation under the directive. It's setting the pace globally for the scope of the rights. The second is, with a few notable exceptions, it protects public freedom of expression. And that's the lifeblood to turn the truth into power, is people knowing about the abuses of power. The third is that the directive, with a few exceptions, again, has pretty much killed the good faith standard in terms in which whistleblowers' motives were put on trial instead of the abuses of power that they exposed and the retaliation they suffered. A fourth benefit from it is confidentiality. Boy, I'm a US practitioner. I'm so jealous of the European ones for confidentiality rights. They not only protect identity, but identifying information. They require advance for discretionary releases of information that would out the whistleblower. It requires advance notice, express advance permission from the whistleblower. For non-discretionary decisions, they have to get advance notice and warning so they're not blindsided by this development. The confidentiality rights travel with the evidence when the case is transferred to different agencies. And there's even accountability and discipline, in some cases criminal prosecution, for violating confidentiality rights. Very, very envious of those rights. I'm also envious that unlike US whistleblower law, which is basically labor management rights, the directive creates an affirmative whistleblower defense against civil and criminal liability, retaliatory prosecutions, which can be much scarier than just losing your job. The anti-gag provisions in the directive are outstanding and have been largely complied with by the member nations, so that gag orders, either as conditions of employment or even in most cases national laws, can't override the free speech rights in the directive. And seventh is that the directive establishes channels as the rule rather than the exception. Symbolically, this is such a breakthrough for our movement because it means that dissent is no longer something that's just by gadflies or kind of nutty people or folks off the reservation. Now it's an accepted, legitimate part of every institution in society, freedom of dissent, to challenge wrongdoing by that institution. And it's the first time in history that it's been so legitimate. That's the good news. Now I'd like to share some of the things that are keeping me awake in terms of how well this law will work. The first problem is harmonization. Only about a third of the national laws only apply to EU violations, not to violations of national law on the same topics, sometimes maybe the same misconduct. And that means there's going to be at least 2 sets of rules and a lot of confusion and chaos what the rights are. The second thing is, which I think is unsurpassed in terms of weaknesses, is the directive does not protect, the implementation of the directive does not protect what we nickname duty speech. The overwhelming context for communications of protected information is not finger pointing. It's people just trying to do their jobs honestly. And that's where we need whistleblower rights the most, so we get the information into the right hands without a lawsuit or a public controversy. But only 3 out of the 27 nations are even silent about whether the rights apply when you're just carrying out your job responsibilities. 24 nations restrict the anti-retaliation rights to going to a channel, an official channel within the institution. If you talk to your boss about it, if you talk to your coworkers about it, if you talk to the media about it, those rights don't necessarily apply initially. And that's kind of hurting the whistleblowers into very narrow opportunities for freedom of speech. The problem with that, then, and I think that's a good reason to go into the next issue, the problem with channels. The directive has, I thought, very responsible standards for these new institutions. But any new institution goes through intense growing pains before it settles down into its final identity. And there's a real need, when an institution is relatively unstructured, there's opportunities for horrible abuses. The directive has good standards, but so many of the nations that implemented it, and everybody implemented the channels requirement, but so many didn't comply with those standards, at least in their official requirements. This means that they can be very dangerous institutions. I've worked with a lot of channels in the United States and seen 2 dynamics that happen very frequently. One is the channel does its job honestly and is committed to the principles for which it was established, and then they get the whistleblower treatment. I think Susanna was experiencing that some last year. Other channels then go the opposite direction, and they become almost like intelligence operations for the same officials who are the target of the whistleblowing disclosures. And they get advance warning of the evidence against them and an opportunity to take out the whistleblower before anybody else knows about their evidence. They can be very high risk. And this isn't a theory. This is what has happened so many times in my experience. So they need to have more effective structural controls for them, because this is where the action is under the directive right now.
I gotta be the mean moderator right now because we're on a bit of a schedule, but we may be able to include your other points during the question section when we have a little more time. So I gotta be a little harsh.
Oh, I've got more things to attack.
Perfect, we're gonna do that. I would just forward to Wim, if you could do your opening statement. 5 minutes is the goal, but not
4 would be better.
We'll try.
Now, I want to focus on internal whistleblowing channels, so not the external channels, but inside organizations. We know that, roughly speaking, at least 9 out of 10 whistleblowing cases start internally. The directive also gives some attention to that. I think, Anna also mentioned it in the directive. This is also quite new, that organizations need to do something. They need to set up internal whistleblowing channels and actually operate them well. So I want to talk about the competencies of organizations to actually operate good internal systems. And what we did at EDHEC Business School as part of the BRIGHT project was we developed SUSE, and SUSE stands for Speak Up Self-Assessment. It's a free online tool where integrity professionals, so people running these internal systems can actually self-assess or self-check how well their systems align with the EU requirements as well as with the ISO standard on internal channels. So the EU requirements would be minimum, and the ISO standard that's a consensus on best practice. And so we developed that and launched that, and I want to thank two people who are in the audience here today for help with that. One is Sonny Leupart from Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and the other one is Koen Albers from the Institute of Internal Auditors. And they helped me through the ACFE and IIA networks to help find people to help with the translations and also with the promotion of the tool. Thank you for that. So we launched in September, and by January we had 219 people or organizations had made use of that. We analyzed that data and we put that out in a report. You know, you try that QR code, you get to a page, you can download some guidance we developed, but also the full report, and you can also use the SUSE tool yourself. But just some, I mean, it was pretty much bad news. So, you know, how good is the quality? My look at it, it's pretty bad. I was a bit disappointed to see it was so bad. So that's why we call the report the lowlights report. But, you know, it's poor quality in terms of, to start with, feedback. So a couple of things, you know, an EU requirement is acknowledgement of receipt within 7 days. Only 60% of organizations says they always do that. If you then look at further feedback, so EU requirements is within 3 months. 33% says we only give feedback at closing, whenever that is, so no guarantees on 3 months. 19% says no, we don't give feedback. I mean, come on, you know, that's pretty bad. In terms of the policy, does your policy point out where people can seek support and advice? 69%. Okay, but you know, that's just a policy. Now that's really easy to do, and only 69 does that. Does it mention where to report externally? Only 61% actually does that. I think that's too low. And then when you really get to the ISO standard, it talks about a system, a management system. Think about quality management, plan, do, check, act, and continuous improvement. What's the number of organizations that have that mindset? Because for me, that's an indicator of quality and maturity in this. You say, the question was, at the closing stage, if appropriate, do you seek feedback from whistleblowers about, you know, what was really problematic in the handling process, for example? Only 57% seeks feedback from the whistleblower. Now, say that to a quality manager and they would say, like, what a missed opportunity. But that's really low. Even worse is do you have a documented process to evaluate your system and maybe come up with some improvements? 43%, not even half. So, you know, they have the channels, and some really operate them well on case-by-case basis, but there's so many missed opportunities. So I think in terms of competencies, we're also lacking there. It's great that we have some benchmark, but the coming years, we've got a lot of work to do to help organizations get better.
Thank you so much, Wim. I couldn't agree more. So when it comes to internal whistleblowing, there is still some room for improvement left. Let's turn to external whistleblowing and listen how there's everything perfectly in place as it's supposed to be. Please, your opening statement.
So I am from external channel. Actually, for 20 years, I work in General Prosecutor's Office, and I can tell you that last 6 years were the most interesting because I work with whistleblowing in this office. And I remember very well a meeting in International Labour Organization. It was 2021, I believe. And we had a meeting about protection of whistleblowers in public sector. So the room was filled of participants, representatives from all over the world, Asian countries, South American, African countries. And we were all discussing about how to protect whistleblowers. And I saw that lots of countries struggle with creating laws, struggle with political will. And at the same time, I felt very happy, grateful, and proud that European Union has a directive and we have a roadmap. Of course, that was a stage of implementation, and we had lots to do, but we still had rules how to proceed, and that was great. And the process of implementation, it's now over, or at least in lots of countries. And it is a significant milestone, of course, but however, it is just a first step to my mind. Because as the saying goes, that rules without practice, they are just word on paper. So, and they are not alive. So legal framework is basically only words if we don't apply it correctly, and if we don't apply it efficiently, if we don't have trust from whistleblowers. And this is the stage where we are now. We have to make it work. And our work, no matter if we are practitioners, representatives from NGOs, policymakers, any other stakeholders who are involved in this very important area, our work is just the beginning, in a beginning stage. And since I am working with some practical cases of whistleblowers, I can tell you, and I don't have to tell you, I think everyone who is working with real whistleblowers knows that this stage is very, very hard and very challenging, because we have to understand that whistleblowers, they put their own life at risk usually. And it's not about investigations, it's not about collecting statistical data, it's not about framework, it's about real life of a real person. And this acknowledgement actually brings a huge burden on us. And that's why we have to ask what's next, but we'll discuss it, I think, later.
Thank you so much. So we had the perspective on the legislator, we had the perspective on the internal channels, on the external channels. Now there's the watchdog who judges them all, the NGO. Please, Angelos. Yeah.
Thanks. So as a Greek, I'm the German anti-hero of this of this panel. So I will try to keep it into the 4.5 minutes, but also share as much as possible with all of you. So I'm glad to see that there are lots of experts here, high-profile practitioners, etc. So we all understand the nexus, the relation between the CSOs, the private sector, the advocacy, and the public sector in general. So there has to be a high level of collaboration if we want to ensure that the regulation is being enforced, everyone is safeguarded, etc., etc. But the question is, what happens when the environment is so hostile for the whistleblowers that we cannot talk about competencies, but we need to talk about survival of them, and also how CSOs, watchdogs or not, INGOs, whatever, can safeguard and then expand the term, the notion, the ideal of the whistleblower. So regarding Greece, let's say that we have major issues because apart from the 4 constitutional independent authorities, all the other ones are national ones, and the ones that are independent and I quote the chair of one of them, they operate under the government's boot. They say there is underfunding, they are receiving threats, and the best part of it is, like in Greece, all the authorities cannot just show up in the parliament. Even if there is an issue they cannot refer to, they cannot adhere, they only present their cases under invitation. So there are major cases in the country. The chair people all around the independent authorities are knocking the doors, but they're not being invited for more than 6 months, 12 months, etc., etc. So even if there is a whistleblowing case from the National Transparency Agency or other agencies, they're unable to make a case because they are not invited in the parliament. And in the parliament, there are several cases, as I shared yesterday with Simon, the Novartis case, the Pegasus, etc., etc. We have the high officials that are like, in the best scenario, like afraid of exposure, they're afraid of scandals. There are links, let's say, with another major case, the Greek mafia case. There are the lobbying groups. And we have like politicians that are also acting in between several other institutions, such as the chambers of commerce in Athens or around. But at the same time, we have diplomatic cases, highly diplomatic cases that affect not only Greece, but all of you, Qatar case, etc., that is happening, taking place even here. And there is also something that we have noticed is that the diplomatic offices, or however to put diplomats, they have a tendency to work differently when they operate in Greece and other countries in Southeast Europe, and in a different way when they are back home. No pointing fingers, but you understand, like doing business in Southeast Europe or Middle East or whatever is in a different context when doing business in Western Europe. And this affects also not just the competencies, but also the context in general. So we have the big companies, we go to the private sector, that let's say is like an only door to enhance the whistleblowers and protect them. Of course, again, we have issues with the big companies, not only in Greece, but I think revolving doors is everyone's problem. Then we have a direct interfere in cases. And since February 2024, when a new directive was passed regarding whistleblowing, in case of a high official or any official that feels that his or her position is threatened in the government or in a place, the identity of the whistleblower can't be revealed. And we had the case of Novartis, when for 3-4 years, and the conviction of the company and the people in question in United States. In Greece, we passed the law, the directive, whatever, at 9 o'clock. 11 o'clock, we all knew the names of the whistleblowers, which was like, yeah, targeting. And thankfully, the journalists were already out of the country. And thankfully, they are still under the radar and they are alive. Because there were cases with drugs, there were cases also in Tempe that we see that there are officials that are like relatives of officials being missing, killed, accidents, etc., etc. So it's a long, long story, but it's difficult to share, let's say, best practices. It's difficult to see how you can enhance competencies, and it's difficult to say, like, it's one thing to learn how to swim in the pool and another way to swim up the river. And then we also have the maritime sector, which is vast, not only in Greece, but internationally. And only this year we had more than 10 cases of people that are calling us and they ask for advice, what to do, which is very complicated because when you go to maritime law and other systems, you have the flag, you have the nation, you have the headquarters, you have company headquarters, you have a captain at the ship, and all of them, they are different. Do I have half a minute?
Those are beautiful 4.5 minutes.
So, again, I will say that achieving high collaboration with all the stakeholders is quite challenging, but I believe that is quite possible. How it is possible, and then we come to competencies, is, as I say, keep your friends close, but always your enemies closer. So I think that is all a matter of networking with academia, with scholars, with big investors, with lobbyists, with people that you disagree, with people that you feel that you can learn, and you might find, surprisingly, allies in places that you never thought of. And we might be at Woodstock, but I want to mention this, that we have a great collaboration with the National Transparency Agency the past few years with the people there directly, like with the interim governor and with also the head of strategic office. So in the meantime, we judge harshly the fact that there is no governor in the NTA the past 2 years, though they should have one placed in 2 months. So it's the government that interferes. And yeah, so identifying policymakers, practitioners, etc., that can be a quality add in your network, I think it's the most important, in order for you to confront, let's say, the powerhouses or people that they really hate whistleblowers as a notion. And last but not least, and then we can go, is like we need to keep our mind open, to follow the trends, be well informed, because people when are working in private sector, they read the news, they follow the news, they are interested, there are people up to date because they see opportunities. And if you lose an opportunity in terms of whistleblowing, you lose lives, you lose also opportunities, and you are unable to follow the legalities. And I think I will close here and we can return.
I promised everyone it's going to be interesting but depressing, and I think you kept that promise. But there was a ray of light in the end as well, which is very important. Now, since I've been very German to you and cut you short, I would like to use the first question, if you would like to continue to elaborate on your critique of the directive. And in general, what do you think are the most important issues that advocacy is facing right now? I mean, we got the directive, everything's fine now, right? So is there something left to do?
Oh, well, yes, I think there's a lot of work to do before we can confidently say that the directive is a net positive. And I think there's a lot more work to do before we can say that it's achieved its excellent objectives. But I think the good news is it's so worth it, and it is having a real impact. As far as more gripes about the directive, I was complaining that a number of the channels are unstructured and don't comply with all the directive's criteria. That gets reinforced by one of the most common weaknesses, which is 10 of the 27 nations don't give whistleblowers the unqualified freedom of choice to choose between internal or external channels for their initial disclosure. If the internal channel is working effectively, it's great. That's where you get the evidence into the right hands the most quickly. If the institution is in bad faith, this can be like obstruction of justice, where you're turning in the evidence to the people who want to see it destroyed before it gets into the right hands. Now, there are exceptions in the directive if you think that it would backfire. But those exceptions, you're not going to know whether you're on the right side of them until the whole case is over, years later. So there's a real chilling effect, right, forcing people to go to the internal channel first. I think an unsurpassed challenge in meeting the objectives, the directive's objectives, is burdens of proof. The directive has by far the strongest and best burdens of proof globally. For a whistleblower's prima facie case, they only have to show they engaged in protected speech, that they were genuine whistleblowers, and something happened to them that's prejudicial. Then the employer has to show that it was independent, not linked in any way to their whistleblowing. Is their affirmative defense? Well, that's great, but that's not what so many countries implemented. A lot of them were just very generalized, but some of them actually even said, well, you succeed in the affirmative defense if you have a justified reason for acting against the whistleblower. And It's a practical matter, that's an invitation for more retaliation, to come up with a justified reason before you actually take the official action, something that you wouldn't have cared about at all if they hadn't blown the whistle. And if you think this is theoretical, I'll share one example that I shared with the EC folks from my practice. There was a whistleblower who successfully exposed, and there was prosecution, he was vindicated, sexual harassment, sexual coercion by high government officials in DC. This was very politically unpopular, and when the investigator wouldn't cancel his report, he was put under a retaliatory investigation, find some dirt on him. They went back 30 years, interviewed 300 people before they found some dirt on him. And they did. We all have skeletons in our closet if we're human beings. If somebody is determined to find them, they will. And then they criminally prosecuted him. Well, they had a justified basis. He was guilty of the misconduct they finally found. But it was devastating in terms of whistleblower rights. So I think the burdens of proof and the concept of being able to have free speech rights wherever it's needed instead of just in channels are sort of the two biggest challenges.
Thank you so much. Absolutely agree. In Germany, that was one of the problems. I know in France it was in other places, because the directive has different wording. One says not linked in any way, and the other says may not be justified, and then people or countries interpreted it differently. And as you absolutely said, it's very much a difference if you say not linked in any way or justified cause, because people will fight dirt and say, well, it's a bundle of motives. Part is whistleblowing, part is something. Yeah. So that's going to be interesting how that's going to turn out in the future. So we definitely got some legal improvements to made, but I wanted to ask Wim, since I've played down the role of academia a bit and took you in with me, basically, as those useless academics, which you certainly are not, I wanted to save the honor of the two of us. Where do you think is the role in academia in the future to foster competencies, and specifically the work that you're doing? How can we improve competence?
Well, I think, in academia, I think we're well placed to, with what we do, if we can support people who are fighting the good fight, whether those whistleblowers or civil society or people in a legal profession or policymakers. So I think that's an important aim. You will understand that it's quite easy or tempting for an academic to go into the, just publish stuff that other academics read. I think, we need to stay away from that and look at reality. But I mean, for example, with the SUSE tool, there were things like that, or things that looked like that, but they were, I mean, you will know them, Navex, EQS, those are the big companies, and they have simple online things, 5 simple questions, and right? But the first thing you need to do is you need to put in your email address. So, I mean, it's something that looked like 5 simple questions to sense your quality, but the aim is to sell you stuff or to approach you stuff. So with SUSE, we took the totally different approach. It's a bit longer, it's more than 5 questions, but it's anonymous. We don't collect any identifiable data. We don't collect IP or geolocation. So it really is. It's going to be your assessment. We will know what the scorings are, but there's no way for us to know whose scoring that is. And maybe that's why they've actually come out lower, because otherwise people would be answering, in a socially desirable way. I think we're able to avoid that with our SUSE tool. So maybe, that is with this particular case. I think that's an important added value to what already existed, and I think that comes from academia. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you so much. And I fully agree. I mean, you know it better than anyone. Empirical data is hard to come by in this field because people don't like to talk about their own programs. And if you have good empirical data, for example, EQS and others publish it, there's always a tendency that it might be tainted because it might be too optimistic because they're selling something, just as you said. So I'm very happy that you started that project so we can finally get some data on what's going wrong internally. But as you said, as an academic, you shouldn't focus on the theoretical paperwork and everything all the time. So I wanted to ask you specifically about your personal experiences in setting up this channel, because I know in most European countries it was either the first time or channels had to be improved. Are there any lessons you've learned in the beginning where you're like, okay, those are main takeaways. If you set up an administrative channel, that's something we learned. That's something we've got to do in the future.
Okay, if we talk about channels, you talk about internal and external, or?
Mostly or external, but give me anything you got.
Okay. Since, yes, in Lithuania we have just one external channel, it's General Prosecutor's Office. So basically we do everything in the field of whistleblower protection. And the main lessons, I think, would be that since we are the only one external channel, we are not the only one who takes role in whistleblower protection. There are a lot of stakeholders, NGOs, investigative authorities, internal channels as well. Whistleblowers, they also take a part in whistleblowing, because our first recommendation is that you have to keep yourself safe. You have to decide a lot of things, to think about a lot of things before blowing a whistle. We have one case, actually, and after this case, we have a strong recommendation for whistleblowers. Don't blow the whistle from your job computer and from your office, because we had a case of whistleblowing. The man filed a report to our office, and after 15 minutes, he was dismissed, because managers knew that he did it using AI tools. So main lessons learned is that cooperation between all stakeholders is an essential thing. Regular dialogue, regular meetings, secure transfer of information. For example, if we send report to other authority, if it's not a criminal case, of course we don't investigate it, so we send it to, for example, Ministry of Environment. So the transfer process must be safe. Regular meetings, very, very important. We do as much as we can, being external channel, to meet with all stakeholders, especially with public authorities. And we do it by sectors. We meet with healthcare sector, we meet with national security, with financial sector, internal affairs. And what was the outcome? I had one meeting with internal affairs subjects, and we were brainstorming like possible, because we said that, well, we don't have any reports in internal channel, maybe everything is perfect. So I said, well, I don't know, but you can brainstorm possible reports, possible violations. For example, I found out during that meeting that only firemen can file a report that someone is using ladders from a firefighter's machine to build a house for the boss of fire rescue brigade, or how it's called. And only doctors from medical sector can file a report that, for example, drugs are not kept like they should be. So another recommendation is that you know your sector best. So you know what reports you might expect. And it doesn't mean that if you will brainstorm with your colleagues that it's a bad thing, it's a good thing, because you know what to expect, and they know that if they see something bad, they can report to you. So cooperation, I think, is the main lesson learned.
Thank you so much. And I directly want to use that to ask you, what is your perspective, Angelos, on the whistleblowing culture that you see, not just in Greece, but generally as a TI representative? How is it in companies? How does it differ maybe in the government? Are we on a good track? Is this improving? Is this working? Or where do you see are still challenges we have to face in terms of whistleblower competence?
So, first of all, let's admit that whistleblowing is still the most effective way to combat corruption, like even today. So we have like traditional ways to enhance the whistleblower by promoting success stories, by giving space to the whistleblowers to share more. I think that especially in countries that are experiencing dark governmental situations, whatever, I think that this is for the best, like to have a face, to put a face on combating corruption and make example in terms of building coalition networks, etc. When it comes to modernizing, let's say, the term, I think that we cannot exclude AI from the discussion. Most of the companies are emplacing it. And then I see that TI has a huge role to play, either in the ethics committee and also other organizations they can do, but also implementing strict protocols for the ones that are placing the data, safeguarding the data officer. And I think the new focus will be in the data officers and the ones that are managing the platform. So I think that, let's say, the future whistleblowers will mostly come from their side. People that will be forced to add or exclude data that are convenient or non-convenient for others. And then we will see how it goes from there.
Thank you, thank you. And again, from my experience in AI law, I couldn't agree more. That's going to be probably the main or one of the main focuses for whistleblower cases in the future. I would like to ask Tom, because the great thing about having you here is that you have experience in the field of whistleblowing advocacy as nobody else, I would claim. Your experience in the United States, how you advanced whistleblowing law, how you advocated for whistleblowing policies. I know it's hard to condense all those years of experience into just a few statements, but what do you think European NGOs or European advocacy, the European movement, can learn from the US, can learn from your experience and how you pushed whistleblowing laws in the US way before the European Union was even starting it?
Oh, I think for NGOs, the magic word is persistence. You know, one of the nice things about the directive is that it requires reviews every 3 years. And nobody ever gets anything right the first time. And that's certainly been the case with the US law. We don't have that review requirement. But because the NGOs engaged in constant oversight, you know, really acted as watchdogs and were stubborn and persistent, we're now in the 4th generation of our Whistleblower Protection Act and fighting hard for the 5th generation. So I think, you know, never easing up is one of the most significant suggestions. The other is to, you know, and this is a point made earlier today, to concentrate as much on the emotional challenges of whistleblowing as the legal challenges. This is, you know, for folks I work with, it may be one of the most stressful things in their lives. You know, other than a death in the family or, you know, loss of a loved one or something. All the assumptions of their life. People identify with their jobs. This is who they are. This is their identities, and most all people believe in them. And all of a sudden they find out that everything that they've been assuming, all the premises about their professional life, may have been false, may have been a con. And that in itself is very traumatic. And then when they find out that everything they've worked for in order to develop their careers and support their families is now on the verge of extinction, it's an incredible, horrible stress. And we lawyers sometimes can be kind of like, you know, the surgeons who don't really get to know the patients. They come in and give them a heart transplant, but they never really get to know them that well. Well, that doesn't work with whistleblowers. And I've had several clients who snatched defeat from the jaws of victory because they cracked. After we were winning every legal battle, they cracked. And in fact, they would decide that I was a spy for the other side. And it was because I wasn't sensitive enough to their suffering. So I think that's something very important for us.
Thank you very much. It just reminded me, because we're talking about competencies, maybe it's not an infringement of my duty of confidentiality, I think. When I was advising the German government on the German whistleblower law, the first draft didn't have any intangible damages for psychological suffering and for pain and suffering, psychological issues and so on, which at least most people would agree the directive requires. We put it in there, we convinced the ministry that they should put it in there, so it would be compliant, and because it's so important, as you said, because the psychological aspect is so important. And then in the middle of the night, 11 p.m., when the coalition and the German states had this agreement, had to make an agreement, the one side was saying, wait, if you get intangible damages for your whistleblowers, we want to have intangible damages for the accused people. Where I was like, when they consulted me, I was like, well, that's fine. Like, if somebody really is framed in a wrong, there are rules on that, it's fine, they should get that as well. Then they got back into the room, and the good guys called me a little later and said, we made a great success. We made it clear that the accused people would not get intangible damages for psychological suffering, and all we had to give them in return was to say that whistleblowers would also not get intangible damages for pain and suffering, and now everything's fine. I tried to explain to them in the middle of the night what a kind of a Pyrrhic victory that was, but that's another thing. You know it with all your experience, many people in the room know it, but legislators, even with the best intention, may not know what are really the crucial aspects for whistleblowers in such cases, and psychological issues, as you so wonderfully put it, absolutely are. Which brings me back to Wim, actually, again, because you and your academic research is not just focused, as I already said, on theoretical things, but on empirical studies as well. And you said one important aspect is that you can get empirical results which are neutral, let's put it that way. What would you say, because not everybody is reading every study on whistleblowing, what would you say are maybe the key or some of the key empirical findings that we can say more or less for certain in the literature is true in terms of whistleblowing cases? You already mentioned 90% go internal and something, because I feel when people talk to others, they rarely know what empirical findings are actually safe and secure and pretty much universal in the literature, at least to some degree.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think, you know, that research on, I think it's the empirical finding that whistleblowing is not a one-off decision that people make. It's more like a protracted process. I mean, there's research in Australia that shows that. We've done some in the UK. We've got data from the US as well on that. So that's quite clear. So there's metrics on that, and I think, you know, in research, like people like Kate Kenny has done, she's documented that through qualitative research. It's really, you know, how does it evolve, and all of a sudden, right, when people realize and start to identify as a whistleblower, they're already knee-deep or neck into, yeah, you're a whistleblower. So I think that's an important finding, because it also, I think, you know, it ties in with what Monika said. People would say, oh, we've had 0 reports through our channels. And that's because, yeah, you know, who can report? I mean, how do you say what whistleblowing is? An example, one I heard recently was, yeah, we've got 0 reports, but whistleblowing is really about corruption, evidence of corruption. So if someone says, yeah, you know, I have to review these files before they need the final signature, and I would really need a week to do this, but I only get half a day, so I'm being pressured. That in itself is not corruption, but it's a clear indicator. If that's the pattern, you know, that's a risky thing. So would you report that through a channel? You know, you could, but then you would need someone doing the triage, say like, okay, this needs to go to audit, that this is a pattern, they need to do this stuff, okay. So I think, you know, you need to, I think it's the finding that it's going to really pay off for an organization if it succeeds in looking widely to speak up. You know, even I know there are very few organizations who are amazing at this, but they would even, if they do some training, on an ethical issue in a part of their organization. The week after that, they need to see either through the question channel or the reporting channel. They want to see an uptick. If they don't see an uptick, it's like, was the training good? I mean, they go that far. So any kind of, people don't need to make allegations if they ask questions. Well, okay, this is on their mind. So it's a very different approach. I know that we've been talking about, if you have a question about something in the gray zone, your life is not in danger. Okay, so that's very different from a lot of cases that you've been dealing with. But I think, the sort of, for me, the most important empirical finding is that whistleblowing is not a one-off decision. You all of a sudden, you find yourself in it, and then it's probably already too late.
Thank you. It's not a one-off decision, and only few make the decision to go to you, Monika, because most stay internally. I just wanted to ask you, from your experience and what you've learned, most, as I say again and again, most of whistleblowing authorities are kind of new. What do you think whistleblowing authorities, what role should whistleblowing authorities play in fostering whistleblower competencies in the future? And what kind of ideas and improvements do you think might be useful?
Firstly, we have a situation that usually people come to us because we have a system that we can choose whether to report externally or internally. So we get more reports than internal channels because we constantly monitor the situation in internal channels, and they provide us data, and we see that they get very few of reports only. But I think until we are not sure, until we are pretty much sure that internal channels are not created like in the right manner everywhere, it's better to have the opportunity to address externally right away. But we are constantly working on, we, General Prosecutor's Office, External Channel, we are continuously working on awareness raising and training. Sometimes these two categories overlap. Sometimes awareness raising includes trainings and vice versa. But I would like to share information about an awareness raising campaign. We started this campaign in 2023, and we had 43% of rise in number of reports comparing to 2022. We started the campaign in September, and 60% of all reports were received in last 4 months after the campaign started. So you can see that we saw the difference like immediately. And in 2024, the next year, we also had 5.6% rise in the number. So basically, in total, if we count 2 years when we have the campaign, its reports increased by 50%. So next year, we're also, hopefully, we'll get money from the government because, as you all understand, now we shift the money to the defense sector, of course, but hopefully we'll still receive money and we'll have the campaign 1 more years, in the following years as well. Another thing is trainings. Usually we start the trainings for internal channels. How to create those channels. We have recommendations for them, how to do it, and etc. But usually they don't like to do trainings by themselves. They just ask us to do the training. And I want to share a short story from my life. After that story, we just changed the perception of trainings. So I have a 9-year son, and he's in the 3rd grade. And one evening, we were talking about the school, and he said, well, Mom, we'll have a new unit of inquiry called It's Okay to Say No. And I was like, okay, it's strange. So I called the teacher, asked for a meeting, and I asked her, what is that unit about? In the 3rd grade, you have a unit, it's okay to say no. So she explained the idea behind the unit. The idea was that students would explore situations where it's not saying no, it's not only acceptable but necessary, and the situations might be like refusing to follow a friend which is in trouble, or standing up against bullying, or etc. And the goal was to say to the child that their voices matter, and setting up boundaries and saying no, it's not a weakness but a strength. So after that meeting, I called to my colleague and I said, well, you know, we're doing everything wrong. We have the wrong audience. We have to target kids. Because, you know, if you want to change perception, with lots of people today were talking about stigmas around whistleblowing, right? So we cannot change stigmas probably we cannot change stigmas in our like generation, but we for sure can do it if we target kids. So now we're having campaigns in schools, in primary schools, in universities, and now we have like a few possibilities for new awareness-raising campaign, and one is that the parent would be like a hero, and the whistleblower would be like a hero for his child, like Superman or something like that. So he would, you know, we are targeting families from the angle of the kids. So I think that's it.
Thank you so much. That's really a great idea. Let's get them at kindergarten, and then they're ours. No, but really, thank you for those interesting insights. Last of the formal questions, and then we're going to open up the questions from the public. Again, I have to think of the two of us, or actually three of us, sitting at the hotel lobby, and you telling me a few things about Greece and Greek culture and Greek whistleblowing culture in particular. Ninon also said today that German culture has some specifics, that duty of loyalty, that ethos of loyalty that is still there. And since you're an expert on Greece, and competence means something different in every culture, I just wanted to ask you if you can give us a brief insight into what you're encountering in Greek culture, and how you would compare that to other whistleblowing culture, which you know as a member of TI. What are the specifics? What are the cases? Something tangible? How can we understand how whistleblowing is perceived in Greece and other places?
So there is a big discussion about, as you said, the stigma and how the whistleblower will be perceived from their co-workers, society, etc. And I would say that after the World War II, I would say for a very long period, a whistleblower was considered, in Greece at least, as a snitch. But after the financial crisis, and after all this that happened, and the exposure of the governments, of the financial system, etc., I think that, and you mentioned ethos, very correct, I think that the whistleblower is being enhanced as a notion, as an idea, as a person of interest, as a person of huge importance to the public and also for the companies. I don't see them yet as of a big capital regarding the government or the public sector, but I see them as a huge capital regarding safeguarding the public interest when it comes to environment, when it comes to the health sector, when it comes to either horizontally the public. And then we go to the private sector, and I would say this with through my discussions with the compliance directors from major companies, either construction, heavy industry, petrol, whatever. And this is very important because our companies are outgoing. Like we operate in Middle East, Balkans, Latin America, etc. So I think that the Greek brand is kind of welcomed, but I think that the compliance officers, the directors, they pay a lot of focus of reputational risk, and they don't want to be the company that will be playing all around the media. On the contrary, we see that the government, not the agencies and the institutions, but the government per se, they call us for risk management. So wherever there is a situation, like till there is a situation, they don't call us, they exclude us, the dependent authorities, all the platforms, the institutions. But when there is a case, we included Transparency International, we included the platform, we included the Public Prosecutor Office, we included 15 bodies, just to take the responsibility out and give it to someone else.
Sounds a little bit familiar, yeah? All right. Thank you, everyone, so much again. This is not finishing the panel, as I said, but I'm now very keen to hear questions from the audience. And Vigilanza is exploiting.